Welcome to Real Talk with Sterling Real Estate Group, your go-to podcast for all things real estate related. Each episode, we break down the latest market trends, share insider tips, and bring in local industry experts to offer valuable insights that empower your journey. Whether you're buying, selling, building, or investing, we're here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape with clarity and confidence. Let's get real about real estate. Welcome to Real Talk at Sterling Real Estate Group. Today, I'm excited to have with us Mike Isles from Spa Septic. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Lisa. It's nice to be here.
Good. I'm glad. So before we got started, you told us that your company has a little tagline, right?
Yes.
You want to share what that is?
Yeah, it's kind of become our unofficial thing, and it's don't let poo be a problem for you.
That's great. So septics, Mike, I know a lot of people, right? They get a little worried about septic systems. So let's talk about how do you properly maintain, right, a septic system so people are not scared?
Yeah, so it's not a complicated thing, and there's no reason for anyone to be concerned. There's really not even a lot of thought that has to go into it. Your typical septic system maintenance is, you want to have a professional come and pump that tank out we generally say 3 to 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes in certain situations, it might be a little bit less. Sometimes in certain situations, it might be a little bit longer. That's why it's important to have somebody that can look at it and say, in your situation, this is the interval that I think you should go with. But as a general rule of thumb, 3 to 4 years is typically safe. Outside of that, there's really not a whole lot you have to do to maintain a septic system. You want to be careful of the things that you flush down the toilet, even things that are advertised as flushable, like
wipes, right?
Which are very common nowadays. Those really shouldn't go into a septic tank.
Tell us why. If it says that it's safe for a septic, and you're saying it's not, so what would happen?
So I think when people read flushable, in their mind, you think, oh, this is going to break down. It's going to degrade and just be, turn into the rest of the contents of the septic tank. But they don't. When we go and we pump out a tank for someone and they've been using a lot of flushable wipes, they're just sitting in the tank in a giant glob, which a lot of times isn't detrimental, but they can cause clogs and blockages and things of that nature. So we recommend trying to stay away from those. But also, excessive amounts of grease. You really don't want to put a ton of grease into a septic system. Feminine hygiene products.
Big no-no.
Big no-no.
Yeah.
Basically just the bare bones of what you imagine going into a septic system are what should be in there. And if you do that, pump it regularly, you're generally not going to have a problem. Yeah.
What about your washing machine going into your septic? I've heard various. It should not. It should go into like a dry well because there's some with all of the soap, the fabric softeners, the bleach is not good. Is that a myth? What's your opinion on that?
Well, fabric softener and bleach can be concerning for a septic system. You have a certain amount of bacteria and microorganisms in a septic system that help to break down the waste. So if you're putting excessive amounts of anything in there that could alter that environment, it's going to change the way the system functions.
Okay.
That being said, back in, years ago, it was common to have your washing machine and even sometimes some sinks and things that would go out to a dry well or even just a pipe running out the side of the house. Because that's what they would call gray water.
Yes. Yes. Very familiar with that.
With codes nowadays, it's not allowed. That's not to say it doesn't happen, but with a system that's up to code, that all has to be routed through the septic system. And a properly designed septic system is going to be set up and sized to handle that. So it's really not an issue.
And it's sized by the square footage of the house.
Typically, sizing for a septic system will be based on the number of bedrooms in a house.
Okay.
And then, so septic system design overall in most areas around here has to be done by a professional engineer.
Yes.
They have to provide, drawings that show the specifications for the system, tank size, leach field size, all of the specs. So they typically base it off of the number of bedrooms. Sometimes there may be other criteria depending on what they find
Right.
during their process, but that's your usual deciding
Okay.
factor.
Okay. Right. That's good information. So let's talk about when a buyer is buying a home that is on a septic system. Why is it important to have a septic inspection? And what do you look for a septic inspection?
Sure. So, septic, you have to figure a septic system it's a critical part of your home's infrastructure, and it's an expensive part of
Mhm.
your home's infrastructure. A typical septic system these days, if we were putting in a complete system, meaning tank, distribution box, leach field, your starting price for that is around going to be in the neighborhood of
Right.
$15,000.
And that's for traditional, that's not for raised.
Correct.
And I know we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yes.
Okay.
So the numbers go up from there
Right.
depending on the circumstances. So if when you're going in to buy a home, which is a significant investment for
Mhm.
most people, and you've got this critical piece of infrastructure, if you don't inspect it, you may find out a month or a year or not that long down the road that now this system is failing, and now you have this very large repair bill. Whereas if you do the inspection ahead of time, you know, it gives you a potential bargaining chip to negotiate on the
Right.
price, or the option to just say, no, this isn't something that I want to get
Right.
into. So it saves a potential lot of stress and large bill down the road.
Right. Which it could be. I know, and a lot of agents, if you're looking at a home, and this market is competitive, we all know that. But when you're looking for a home and you keep getting beat out on multiple offers, and some people waive inspections, and some people waive septic. I know our agents here like don't waive septic. That's a pass or fail.
Mhm.
It doesn't come with that $2,000 threshold. And you're right, it could be a major, major expense. So, for all of you out there, do not waive a septic inspection. It's extremely important that you do have one.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so,
Couldn't agree more.
what do you look for? So you locate, hopefully they know where the cover is, the tank. What do
Mhm.
you look for in a septic inspection?
Yeah, so ideally, there's someone that can tell us where the tank is. If there's not, we will locate the tank. We have, methods. We have a probe that we use or
Right.
other tricks, to find out where the tank is. We're always obviously going to access the tank. So what we like to do is, we open the tank and see where the level in the tank is. The level in the tank, it can be an indicator of different things. If it's not at what we would consider a normal level, if it's above normal, that can indicate problems with the leach field
Each
or the
field, yeah.
outflow from the tank. If it's below normal, you could potentially have a crack in the tank. Is the tank leaking out into the surrounding soil, or a number of other things? So we want to see what that looks like when we first open it. We also, we know what material the tank is made out of. Commonly nowadays, septic tanks are made of concrete.
Concrete.
Years ago, they used to make them out of metal, cinder blocks. You've heard the term cesspool.
Yeah, yeah.
So back when people had cesspools, they were often laid up out of cinder blocks by a mason. Um, sometimes now, more recently, you'll also see plastic tanks. It's
The newer
the
septic's going in? Yeah?
um, Newer septics, yes,
Okay.
but where we run into them most and where we use them most is when there's limited access to a site. A concrete tank is typically set with a boom truck or a crane because
Okay.
the tanks are
Yeah.
heavy. So if you can't get a truck in next to where you're working, you
Right.
need a different way to do that. So the plastic tanks are much lighter. We can move them with a smaller machine and they fit more easily in those places. So at any rate, we're going to note the material of the tank, the overall condition of the tank. Then we're going to pump the tank, and there's some inspectors that don't pump tanks. Our feeling is you can't get a true picture if you
Right.
don't pump the tank. So we're going to pump the tank down, and then that also will show us if we pump that tank down and there's a very thick layer of what we refer to as solids in the bottom of the tank. That makes me think, okay, this is a system that has probably not been pumped routinely or maintained well,
Oh,
and that could be an indicator of other problems that we
right.
may find. So we're going to pump the tank down. we're going to inspect the baffles. If, hopefully there's baffles in the tank. Baffles are an important part of your septic tank. They help prevent solids from leaving the tank because you want your solids to stay in the tank. The only thing that should leave the tank is the effluent, the liquid portion. So we're going to look at your baffles. We're going to confirm flow from the house. So we're going to flush a toilet, or we're going to
let some bathroom water, sinks run. Yeah.
Make sure that everything is moving into the tank like it should. And then we typically do a camera inspection on the outlet side of the tank. We'll run our camera from the outlet down into the distribution box. We want to just see the general condition of that line, make sure it's not filled with sludge or there's standing water. When you get into the distribution box, you're kind of looking for the same thing. Overall condition. Sometimes you get root growth if there's trees or bushes nearby. That's not something we like to find. Roots cause problems in the septic system. So just looking for anything of that nature. And then lastly, we typically do a flow test. We run water directly into the outlet line of the tank, and we want to make sure that leach field is able to accept a flow of water without backing up. That's our main thing that we run into with our inspections is oftentimes the tanks are okay, but the leach field, because it's aged or because of poor maintenance or other factors sometimes, isn't able to accept the flow of water, and that's a failure because that's a leach field.
The leach field. Yes. Right. Interesting. So I have when a buyer is purchasing a home in the winter and the ground is frozen, how do you do a septic inspection? Are you using a jackhammer to dig up? I mean, I've been on that side of it. I mean, it's not fun, but
yeah. So it you are correct. It is not fun, but we have to get the job done.
Right.
So if the home is occupied and the septic system is in use, septic systems generate heat just from that microbial action that's going on in the tank. So typically the ground above a septic tank is not going to be completely frozen. So we're able to shovel the snow off and dig down to access it. If we run into situations where the tank is too deep or the ground is just too frozen and people really, what they want an inspection, which they should, then, we'll typically bring in a machine to dig to get through the frozen ground. Last winter, of all of the inspections that we did, I think we only had to bring a machine in for one.
Okay.
And all of the other ones, we were able to get through the frost and everything just with basic hand tools like we typically would. So,
Rid-X. Agree, disagree? And also I heard yeast. You should throw, are these a myth, or is it something to help maintain your tank?
That's a tough one. Depends on who you talk to.
Right.
There's a lot of information out there, especially nowadays with everybody's ease of access to the internet. It's at our fingertips. I am not a fan of Rid-X.
Okay. Is there a reason why?
So I have a friend who is a professional engineer. He basically all he does is septic systems. Okay. He's been in the septic business longer than we have, even. And I trust his judgment. He's a friend and I trust him. So that's really all I need. And his explanation to me was Rid-X, I think they market it as though it helps to break down the solids and the scum in the tank, which it may do. It essentially, emulsifies it. The problem with that is if you turn that into an emulsion and it's mixed in with the liquid, the chances of it either clogging an effluent filter or leaving the tank and going out into your leach field are increased.
Interesting.
I would rather, when we come to pump a tank, I would rather see a distinct layer. We call it a scum layer. Right. Not a very, glamorous term, but that's what we call it. Yeah. So you have that layer on the top of the tank. You have a center section, which is your effluent, which is what's leaving the tank. And then you have your solids on the bottom. And we like to see that definitive separation of those materials. My concern with Rid-X is that you could potentially, eliminate that. Yeast that's another one that I've heard for for years. Yeah, I mean, ever since I was a kid, I think my father used to buy the little packets of yeast and flush them down the toilet. Do I think it's going to hurt? Probably not. But generally speaking, you know, a healthy septic system, it's got a good amount of you know, microbial activity already. So
Right. That's funny.
yeah.
I'm glad I asked
Yeah.
because I use Red-X.
Yeah. It's
Probably not
and
much anymore. I
here's
won't
the
do it.
thing. If you go and Google it, I'm sure you could find arguments for and arguments against.
Right.
But for us, I'm not one. I don't recommend really any septic additives. I haven't found one yet that I'm like, this is a good product.
Right.
This
Just
is what we
do
need.
the natural way and stay away of, what we
Yes.
talked about earlier.
Yep.
I have another question for you.
Okay.
Marking your septic tank with a separate lid so it's easy to access instead of digging up the ground, right? You're putting a lid on top. So when that gets popped, it's a direct access to the lid of the septic. Do you think that's a good idea?
I think it's a fantastic idea.
Yeah.
So we call those risers.
Yeah.
And it's, the explanation we give to our customers is, so if we have to come and we pump your tank, if we have to dig it up, that's an additional fee.
Right.
And right now, I think we charge $125 to dig up a tank.
Is it an hour or flat fee?
It's a flat fee for up to 24 inches deep. We don't hand dig over 24 inches. So
Okay.
if the tank is very deep, which sometimes
Some
they are,
are.
then we're looking at a machine to get in there to access that tank. Whereas once we put a riser in, you have the cost of the riser installation, but after that, there's no additional fees ever going forward.
Right.
It's just the fee to pump. So it really pays for itself.
It does.
In a short period of time.
And the riser's not that expensive. What, a couple $100?
Yeah.
So it's worth.
Typically, within 2 or 3 pumpings, it's paid for itself.
Right.
The other thing with a riser that is worth considering is most new systems, all new systems really nowadays, they have what you call an effluent filter. And that goes on the outlet side of the tank. And it's an extra measure to help prevent solids from leaving the tank and getting into the leach field. But that requires maintenance. Typically, every 6 to 12 months, you need to access the tank, clean the filter, put it back. It's not complicated.
Right.
All in all, it literally probably takes 5 minutes. But if you don't do that and the filter clogs up, your tank will back up and you'll have problems.
Okay.
So
all right.
By having the riser, it's a
easy.
simple process.
Just pop it.
And you're on your way. So I recommend them to everyone. On system, when we install a new system, it's not even an option. This is part of the project.
Right. Yeah. And that's what sets you guys apart too. And the camera. Been on many septic inspections, and a lot of them don't have the camera. So it's, that's good that you're using that.
Yeah.
So you can see,
Oh, we don't leave home without it.
Yeah.
A picture is worth 1,000 words,
Right.
and you want to see what's going on down there.
Yeah.
So.
You know what you're dealing with. Tell me, how do you know if there is something wrong with your septic system? Like what should a homeowner be looking for?
So usually inside the home, what you'll notice is, if your drains are draining slowly, if you're hearing gurgling noises, sometimes if you're getting some odors coming back, that might be an indicator that there's a problem. Typically, the slow drains and the gurgling are what people will hear the most. And that's an indicator that, stuff is not moving into the tank. So you might be due for a pump, or maybe you haven't cleaned your effluent filter recently, so your tank is backed up and full. Typically, if that's the case, people end up calling us because they're not sure what's going on anyway. Other things outside the home that you would look for, usually people have an idea of where their leach field is.
Right. It's always greener.
And
I know exactly where mine are.
Mine is similar.
Yeah.
But if there's excessive amounts of vegetation, if there's standing water, if there's again odors from coming from that area, that would be a sign that the water isn't dissipating into the soil like it's supposed to. It's just pooling there, and that's a sign of trouble with your leach field.
Yeah, pick up the phone right away.
Yeah,
before it gets too worse. So we talked about the benefits of a septic inspection. We talked about the risks, risk if you skip one. We have a lot of people that are buying raw land, right? And whether they're building stick built or putting a modular. How do you test? We know it as a PERC test, but explain what the PERC test test is and what it will indicate. And this is where we were talking about traditional and a raised septic.
Yeah, sure. So, you have to consider when we put in a new system or a system anywhere, we're going to do a PERC test and then also a deep hole test. So PERC is short for percolation. So what they want to see with that is how quickly or how long it takes essentially for a designated amount of water to be absorbed into the soil. And that helps to determine, the specs of the leach field. Also, then we do what's called a deep hole test.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to bring in a machine because the hole has to be typically 5 to 6 feet deep, and
You're not digging it.
You're not going to hand dig that, no. Not at least we're not.
Yeah.
Somebody might,
Yeah.
but we're not. So there's always the engine. This is something that the engineer is involved with. So we have to coordinate with the engineer because they're the ones that actually perform the testing. We come with the machine
digging.
and dig the hole.
Right.
We have the machine. So when we dig that hole, the engineer is actually looking at the layers of the soil and he's looking for groundwater, signs of groundwater. So if you have a wet property, a low-lying property, something that's near a pond or near a swamp, you can actually see, I think the term for it is modeling, and it indicates where the groundwater, seasonal high groundwater, I believe is the term that they use. You have to have a minimum separation there from your leach field for that to be compliant. So what we hope for is the soil perks well. The percolation test is within spec, and that's a pretty broad range. But then we also hope that there's sufficient soil that we can get that separation, and then you could go with a traditional system, a more traditional system. What we see when you talk about the mounds, the raised beds, things of that nature is when you don't have that soil and you've got water problems. So you actually have to bring in material and build a literal mound to put your leach field in so that it can
will pass.
Leach properly.
Right.
And those are the systems that can get quite expensive, and that's why
you're raised. It's much more expensive than traditional.
Yes, easily twice the cost, sometimes more depending on the circumstances.
Right.
So important things to know if you're looking at buying land, because everybody has a budget, and you'd hate to budget for a traditional system and find out that it's now you need a raised bed system, and it's going to cost a lot more.
Right. And it's important having an agent that's familiar how to buy raw land, because there's so much that goes into it. Everyone's just like, oh, I'm going to buy raw land and build a house.
Right.
No. I mean, we've heard, horror stories where, I bought this land and I can't do anything with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
we had a call just the other day from somebody that was buying some land not far from us, actually, and wanted us to come and just take a look, give some feedback, see, what we thought as far as where you could even do something. And we drove by the property just to do a little homework, and all you see is standing water and cattails and just signs of
walk away from the land. Did they walk from it, or did you guys?
I'm not sure. My business partner is going on that appointment.
Is that Ron?
That's Ron.
Hi,
yes.
Ron.
He's going on that, and we'll see what comes of it. It's people will put houses in some interesting places these days.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of raised septic. It's somewhat rare. I mean, you can always tell when you're driving out in the country, you're like, they're raised. Yeah. You kind of, point them out. And that's why some of our builders get, so excited when we're doing developments and like, oh, the soil's great out there, and you're like, okay, so you're doing, traditional.
Yeah.
Mike, is there anything that we missed about septics that anybody else needs to know about?
The one other thing I think that I wanted to touch on is, I've seen this a lot. I'm sure you guys see it. Our area here is very popular right now. There's a lot of people moving to this area that, that are from maybe a city somewhere or someplace where they've been on sewer, and they get a little uneasy about having a septic system.
They do.
It's unknown. It's this foreign thing, and they just have these ideas that, of, I don't know. They think it's going to be this difficult to maintain thing that's going to potentially cause them problems and headaches. And I've seen, several deals fall through because of that basic issue.
That they're nervous about it.
Right. And, I think that's the one thing I would say to people is it's nothing to be worried about. 9 times out of 10, as long as you don't abuse it, it's not going to give you any problems. It's going to function exactly as intended for, 20, 30 or more years. obviously there's extenuating circumstances, but
Right.
by and large, it's not something to be afraid of. It's an easy thing to manage, and I wouldn't let it deter me from buying a house that I otherwise liked.
So
Uh,
if a septic system is operating properly, you know that you've sent a camera down, everything looks good, and it's the original septic that could be 50 years old. Do those like expire if everything's working good? Have you seen septic systems that are, working well that are that old?
50 years might be a stretch, but I mean, we do come across systems that are 20 to 30 years old and they're still doing their job. The difficult thing with an inspection and with a system of any age is when we go to look at a system, it's one singular moment in time, and it's difficult. You can look at it and say, today, this system is in good shape, but you don't know what happens after you
Right.
leave. There's lots of different things can happen. There's been situations where, somebody does work on the land next door and it changes the way the groundwater flows, the drainage, and now this previously dry area sees more
Yeah.
runoff, and that changes things. Or we had one system recently, a customer called us because I think it was a landscaper drove their truck across the leach
Oh,
field, and
yeah.
so there's a lot of different things. I do think when you get into a property that has a system that's 25 plus years old, even if it's functioning very well, you do have to kind of think in the back of your mind that somewhere in the not too distant future that might require some attention.
So let me ask you a question. The septic is in, the leach fields are in.
Hmm.
You start to have a problem with the septic and you have to replace it. Do you still have to go back through all the engineer drawings and everything, or can you just, collapse the current, get everything out of there and just place the new septic where the old one was?
You have to have the engineer.
Okay.
When you put in a new system, you have to get a permit, from the town
Right.
or wherever it is that the house is located, and they all are going to require engineered plans. Even if the system was previously engineered, you still have to have a current set of plans to replace it.
And about how much are those? Any idea?
The engineers, so it depends on the engineers, and I don't want to speak too far outside of my area, but generally $1,500 to $3,000, I would say, is the range where your planning costs are going to be, and that's going to be dependent on the complexity of the system.
Right.
If it's a
Right.
basic system, it's going to be on the lower end. If it's a mound system with pumps and other
Oh, yeah.
things,
It's going to be
then
more.
it's more involved to put together. So there's going to be some extra costs there.
And can the septic, the new one, go where the old one was, or does it have to be located in a different area?
It depends.
Okay. Yeah.
So there are some circumstances where you put the new one, in the same area. We run into a lot of situations like that in a lot of the subdivisions around here. They're small lots. There's just not enough room to go to a completely different
Right.
area.
Right.
So you really don't have a choice other than to put it in the space that's available. And then, in situations where we can, we will try to move it to a different spot, just because that's it's gonna make the system function better.
Yeah. Function a
and,
little bit better.
increase its
Yeah.
longevity.
And people, do not build a deck over your septic tank.
No.
Don't put a driveway. Don't put a paved walkway, right? We see that all the
Oh, yeah.
time. Where's your septic? It's under the deck.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now we got to rip apart the deck to
Mm-hmm.
get to the septic. So that's another
Yes,
good
I've
point.
had times where people built a hatch into their deck so that we
Oh.
could service the septic tank, and yeah, you never know what
Yeah.
you're gonna find.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. So when planning for the septic, think ahead if you plan on having a deck or a
yes,
patio or anything like that,
absolutely.
or maybe putting an addition on.
Mm-hmm.
We often talk about putting an addition on our house, but we can't, because where we want to put it is where the septic tank
Mhm.
is. And, I'm not hoping that the septic goes anytime soon, but
Right.
if it does, and I asked you a question about the how old is the tank, I
Mhm.
might be calling you soon.
Well,
It's coming.
you know the number.
I know. Yeah. Yeah, I got you on speed dial.
Yeah.
All right. So, Mike, RMMI.
Mhm.
That's the overall name of your company. So
Yes.
you have a couple other businesses. So share with our viewers, what else you guys do.
Sure. So we started our company in we started our what is now RMMI in 2020, and originally we called it Equine Site Solutions. And so my wife and I are horse people. We have a horse farm up in Greenfield, and I actually ended up Ron, my business partner. I met him because he was doing some work when we were building the farm,
Right.
and the needs of equestrians are very unique. What makes a facility safe, what makes it efficient, the surfaces that you ride the
Right.
horses on, the footing, they're all it's very particular type stuff. And we had a difficult time finding anyone in the area that could really weigh in on that. So we were left to our own devices. There's lots of great contractors, Ron. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But they'll do exactly what you ask, but you have to ask for it. So our idea with Equine Site Solutions is we can come in as experienced horse people who know both construction and horses, and we're happy to do whatever you want if you know it, but we can also offer some insight as far as what works, what might not work, things you might want to consider. In addition to that, we've invested in the technology for our equipment to be able to grade arenas so that we get uniform riding surfaces, which is important for the horse, the health of the horse.
Right, exactly.
So in a nutshell, that was Equine Site Solutions. Great business, extremely niche.
You're in a good area though for it.
We are, but almost too niche, even with the area we're in. And the name itself kind of pigeonholed us in the horse world. So last year we rebranded into RMMI, which is literally just our initials. Had a logo made and changed things around. We still have Equine Site Solutions. We still do the equestrian focused work. But with RMMI, we're able to also market more towards general excavation, construction, things of that nature.
Right.
And then, Spa Septic, which is part of the whole family,
Exactly.
is there. And, we operate that just, as an entity of RMMI, mostly just for record keeping purposes so that it's all under one roof. So excavation, construction, equestrian focused work, and septic.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
That's a lot.
Keeps us going.
Small company, which is good. All right. Are we missing anything? Anything? No?
I don't think so. I feel like we covered a pretty fair amount of material.
Fun. I know septic is, not everyone wants to talk about it, but I think it's a good educational piece.
100%.
So, Mike, we're going to end with, before, you tell everyone your contact information, don't let poo be a problem for you. I love that. I'm gonna be walking around for the next week with
I know, right?
That.
It's
these
catchy.
are great, and thank you for bringing these in.
It's catchy, for sure.
Yeah. So, Mike, if you could tell the viewers, how can they get a hold of you? How can they get a hold, Spa Septic? And also, we're going to have all your contact information, embedded into the episode.
Great. Yeah. Well, but first, before I forget, thank you for inviting me here.
Sure.
This was fun. And, there's nothing glamorous about septics, but it is kind of interesting to talk about, and it's important.
It's very important.
We all have them, and it's important to know. So you can find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Spa Septic, RMMI, Equine Site Solutions. You can call the office, 518-584-5473. My wife answers the phone, so she'd be happy to take your info and make an appointment for you or answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, and you guys are very responsive.
We try to be. It's important to us. Customer service is
it has to be. There's actually a live person on the other end.
There is. Yes, you speak to somebody who's as close to the owner as she can be.
Right. So. There you go. And when we first met, right, you're like, they're married. I think Ron had said that. I was like, I was kind of getting the sense, so that was a good event. That's, how we got to meet you guys, face to face. And the one gentleman who we did the videotaping outside, I ran into yesterday at an event.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. And he goes, hey, I remember you. And I was like, oh, I thought you looked familiar. Yeah. So that was great. Yeah. So Mike, again, thank you so much for coming in. Tell Ron, tell your wife, I said hello. And that wraps up our episode at Real Talk with Sterling Real Estate Group. Thank you. Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Real Talk with Sterling Real Estate Group. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. If you have any questions about real estate or topics you'd like us to cover, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us at info@sterling518.com.